I'm Samantha Brentmore.
And I'm Rose Dioro. And this is the Rosemoor Roundtable.
Today marks the final episode in our 5-part deep dive series on internet culture and the romance audiobook industry. If you haven't already listened to parts 1 through 4, we encourage you to pause this, take a listen, and come back.
So far, this deep dive has been primarily focused on sharing history, facts, and responses we've received from community members about their experiences in digital and in-person romance spaces. But today, we are going to get a little more vulnerable and dig into our own experiences and reflections on what we've learned in these past few months of research and community conversations.
As a reminder, this 5-part discussion is different than our usual roundtable that features a variety of guests, as we wanted to dig in deeper on some trickier topics, bringing some of the in-depth discourse we've been having privately to the roundtable in an effort to hopefully stimulate your own conversations with your networks and communities.
Before we dive in, we want to be clear that we really don't claim to have one-size-fits-all answers or be a representative of every community within the romance audiobook sphere. We may get things wrong because of our own perspectives and experiences or limited data set.
If there is some factual error, we want to appropriately correct that, so please do email us at rosemoorroundtable@gmail.com.
We hope that what we have unpacked so far and what we will discuss over the course of this episode will spark some reflection both for yourself and your communities, and that you have those conversations yourselves, building on some of the thoughts that have been digging at us.
Okay, let's dive in. We've done a lot of work in parts 1 through 4 to determine where we are and how we got here in terms of internet culture and cultivating a community online. Now we want to shift gears and talk about what's next. Where are we going? And what choices are we, Samantha and Rose, making in our own lives when it comes to how and when we choose to engage online and even in person in the romance audiobook space?
Right. So, Samantha, I want to start off with perhaps a doozy of a question for you. Over the past few years, you've been on projects that brought in a new kind of attention your way in the online sphere. What have those transitional moments been like for you? What are some ways you've changed or adapted your online and in-person engagement to account for it?
Easy. Let's softball to start.
Simple question.
So I think the shortest answer is that the ways that I have changed and adapted has been actually very minimal because of the kind of like principles and strategy that I put in place before I even stepped foot into the community and said, I'm going to invest time and energy in Samantha Brentmore, as a narrator in the romance space. I think those things for me are grounded in the idea that I came from in a previous job, on a weekly basis, having to look at PowerPoint decks where your success and value was tied to, analytic metrics. And I knew that was really not healthy for me. And I didn't want to. If I was going to show up and create content here, it had to be about the content itself and connection, and it couldn't be for me about numbers. So I actually, wherever possible, I turn off view counts. I haven't opened my insights dashboard on anything, which feels crazy because of where I came from. But I really had to disconnect from the numbers piece of it, which is, I think to your question and point is we're talking about some moments in my career that I've had that brought those numbers and those eyeballs and that engagement. Right. So I knew I had to shut that off because I would focus too much on that and on the numbers, and I would lose sight of the creativity and the people behind those numbers. And then the other piece is just a personal view that I have, which is from my own observations of celebrity culture and artists in space, is that I feel that the human psyche is not necessarily built to withstand the type of attention that can come, positive or negative, in a modern context. Especially without support, which, as we've discussed, we don't really have these types of teams to protect us from that. So I really consciously tried to not court that as much as possible. And anytime I feel the attention getting a little bit too hot, I'll remove videos with my face on it, or I'll just pump the brakes a little bit, because that type of mass hot button viral attention, just for me personally, is tough to navigate. And I know that it gets in the way of what I feel like my job is, which is telling the best story I can on a microphone. And so that has meant, I think, a slower progress of my career, but it also means that I think I was better insulated for these moments that have happened to me where books have really taken off, or One of the early ones was doing that live reading in Vegas where like it was like a very public audition to the romance community space.
Right.
And so I think it like helped protect me to be able to better respond. I think the biggest way I adjusted was realizing that like I can't take such like high touch interactions to scale. So adapting and figuring out how I can still stay present in my responses to people and like elevate certain voices in response to the work and like celebrate the scale of the work and its popularity while still, staying true to some of those core like engagement principles that I set for myself.
Mm-hmm. Why? I'm curious to hear more about, you said that this approach that you've taken has maybe slowed your career a little bit. Can you say more about that? Why that's your takeaway?
I just think that there were probably points, like in the years that I've been doing this, that if I was more focused on, the numbers strategy piece of this, that I could have gotten more visibility. I just could have leveraged that to
like
a lot
piggybacking on those moments where you were getting that attention.
Yeah. And I could have made it more about like there is a version in the multiverse where like after Vegas, I'm just now your girl who's like always on camera, like doing these like fun like script bits because you watched me live and don't you want more of that? Like I'm not saying that's wrong, but that like for me, I was like, oh no, like I can't.
That's not the choice you made.
Yeah. And I think it was really important for me, and it still is, like for me as like an actor and an artist, like my sanity and the sharpness of my tool set is directly tied to how much variety I have in my calendar and how I can work. And I think getting really popular and viral for a thing pigeonholes, I feel that it would pigeonhole me in a way that wouldn't give me some of that flexibility.
I mean, it sounds like the answer to this is yes, but would you say, or rather that it's working well, but would you say that it is working well? Do you feel like this strategy, I'm hearing that you put essentially boundaries and systems in place that felt comfortable to you. Do you feel like it's sustainable? Do you feel like what you're doing feels right and is getting you what you want and the experiences that you want without the stuff that you don't want? Or do you feel like there's still room to grow and change in that?
I think for the most part, yes. And I think like I've given myself a long enough like leash, for lack of a better term, to like adapt within that. Small things on a scale of like, I used to repost to my stories every single tag that I was in. And then I realized, no, like what's really important to me is having that billboard space, for lack of a better term, to be able to share creative things that speak to me about like romantic ideals and like textures and feels and vibes. And if it's just 50 things saying like, Leather and Lark is now live, then I don't have the room for that. So I adapted. Okay, well then what am I sharing? What am I amplifying? How? I also wanted to be sure that like juggernaut books didn't take away from other smaller books. So really trying to be really balanced in terms of what I was sharing to still uplift maybe books that didn't have as much like marketing money behind them that I was still on. So I've left myself room to like adapt within that. And I think the fact that I don't feel pigeonholed and trapped, it feels like it is working. And the fact that I haven't had like, I haven't really had any or many like negative interactions with people that I feel like they've crossed the line or a boundary or it got weird. And so that to me speaks to, okay, well, what I'm putting out there is being processed in the way that I want it to.
Thinking about the time when you were feeling compelled to share all of the tags and all of the stuff that was popping up, what was leading you to do that at the time, do you think?
I was looking at the industry and I was seeing people, which is like, it's different. It's apples and oranges. I was looking at authors, and authors would have a book come out, and then when it comes out, forever along, they just are resharing every single thing. So their story is like 100 shares long because people are excited about it. Well, for example, when Leather and Lark released, also Devney Perry's Crossroads released. So I had two releases that I had to balance. And I think as narrators, it's a different thing. It's a different thing we're amplifying and how we do it. So I was really like following a lead from somebody else that I saw that actually was not a one-to-one. For you, like you've worked for a long time in the industry, and you have your community page, which is something I don't manage, but the Rosebuds, and you're on a podcast, you've got, social media presence across the board. Like, do you feel like you have an unspoken community contract that you hold yourself to or feel that you've signed? And like, as somebody who's been in the industry for as long as you have and is as visual or like, visibly represented and put yourself out there, do you feel that you have kind of any kind of responsibility to your colleagues or to the community itself?
I don't know if this makes me sound like a terrible person, but the answer is no. Like, I don't. I feel like it's no to the first part of that question. The only responsibility I feel is to myself in this, that I get to make choices about how and where I want to spend my time and why. And I think that kind of engagement doesn't feel worthwhile to me if it doesn't feel meaningful to me. And if I'm doing it if I'm choosing to do it from a place of obligation, then I'm not really being honest with myself, and therefore I'm not being honest with the people on the other side, on the receiving end of that. So I feel like my job in this space, in this sort of social media, internet, community space, is to always show up authentically as myself and be true to what I want. And in that way, I can serve other people, right? Like I don't want to be engaging in conversations I don't want to be in, because that's not good for anybody,
Right.
So,
but is there like a responsibility or a sense of an unsigned contract then in how you show up when you decide it's right for you to show up?
Yeah, again, I think the only contract and responsibility I feel is to make sure that I really want to be there. I don't know. Like maybe this is not a fulfilling answer, but I suppose I made an agreement with myself a long time ago. I think even before being in the narration space, just as a theater actor, that I really didn't want to do anything that felt inauthentic or icky to me. And because as a result of that, I've definitely slowed my career. Like I definitely missed out on opportunities I could have had, but I just couldn't get myself to do it. I couldn't get myself to do anything that just didn't feel right in my heart, or that felt performative in some way. Even like showing up in an audition room, I was going to choose to bring in material that felt like it's like something I really cared about. I was going to choose to audition for things that were things that I cared about, or that had a specific goal in mind. Like, I want to work with this director because they do these other things that I love. Or I want, it was always like reaching for the thing that felt right in my heart and good in my heart, because being an actor is really hard. Like, choosing a life of instability is really hard. And I think I just realized that, like, there's no point in doing this to myself and my family if it's not meaningful to me. And I know that's like, sounds like, I don't know, like too precious, but I feel the same. I think the same thing about social.
No, but I mean, like, I think that softness is important.
Yeah. And I feel like the same thing applies to how I choose to show up in these social spaces. It takes time. It takes time to show up in that way, and that time is coming from somewhere else. And if I'm going to choose to take that time from somewhere else and apply it to here, it's got to be meaningful. And if it's not meaningful, then I'm just performing for somebody, and I'm not getting paid for that.
Right,
like,
right.
It's not the kind of performance that I want to be doing. It's a kind of something it doesn't feel like my humanity to me. And I always want to show up in like carrying with me my humanity in everything that I do.
Right. Which I think like highlights a point that I think is talked a lot in actor spaces, but is easily forgotten, which is that helps, from my perspective, keep one connected to what makes you uniquely you, which is the only thing we got as actors. And I think we often, especially as we start out in our careers, and we're so hungry to like book work, or later when we feel the work dry up and we're just hungry to book work, that we contort ourselves to be like, yeah, I could be that. I'm an actor. And we like put ourselves into these weird things, and we lose like our version of that character, even if it feels like a character so out of our experience, we should still approach it with what makes us uniquely us and comes from us, and whatever we can do to protect that kind of unique approach, because that's
right. Yeah, I think like a good example of how I kind of found myself to this place is, like I said, before I started narrating, I was kind of already thinking in this way. But we talked about a couple episodes ago about how I did not know what I was getting into in entering the romance space, and I didn't know how to navigate like using a pseudonym and how to separate myself from the pseudonym and what that all meant. And so when I first entered the community as Rose, I was already working as Rose for many years, but when I first realized like, oh, there's like people that I can talk to that know my work, and like we can have conversations and whatever. And people are looking for me, producers are looking for me, and so I need a way for them to find me. I was so unsure of what that was supposed to look like. And there were a few times where I would like kind of go on camera for 10 seconds of something, but I didn't put my face on because I thought that's what you were supposed to do.
Right.
And all that stuff. And it felt so weird. It was so unsustainable for me because the motivation for that was all wrong. The motivation at that point was like, it wasn't on purpose. I just didn't know what I was doing. But I was like, it was clearly, I want people to, they know, like some people know my work already, and now I want them to be able to find me. So I'm going to build this following. And I guess that was kind of the motivation and not connection. And it was so, it did not last very long because I just thought to myself, this doesn't feel anything like me. This is not the kind of person that I am. It's right for some people. It is not right for me. I don't feel, this doesn't feel good. So then shifting to navigating what does feel good? How do I keep the separation that I need, but it's all me. Still just show up as me. And I realized there was a difference. I think I thought they needed to be secret, these two versions of myself. And I realized very quickly it's not secret. It's not secret, it's separate. It's the same person, but there are different audiences and different people that want to engage with me in these ways, and it's all just me. And I'm really clear that it's just me, and it's whatever name you call me, I'm all the same,
Yeah.
And so I think that's just an example of I started that for a proverbial 5 minutes. I showed up feeling like I had a contract with somebody else and I had to show up in these particular ways, but then quickly shifted to realize, no, my contract is with myself first. And the ways that the choices I make are really about checking in with myself and what feels right at my core.
There's something in there about that idea of it being separate that I used to say a lot more early on when I first started doing like interviews and people asking about pseudonyms and stuff. For me, maybe it's like coming from like somebody who has a lot of really diverse interests, and some of them, so like the example I used to use is that like I ran this like Dungeons and Dragons game for like 10 years. And there was a lot of, throughout the course of that experience and the, tons of people that we ran through this game, I would often get asked, somebody wants to come and they just want to watch and they just want to observe, like, oh, this cool thing. And for me, I was like, no. Like, you only get access to this thing if you kind of understand the unspoken, like, rules of respect and understanding. And we're not going to be a spectacle. And for me, a pseudonym and the romance space for me was like, once I opened that door and saw there was this community to engage with where people respected that this was the content that we were creating and reading and understood it, to me, the pseudonym was like the passcode to like get into that community, to say like, we all understand and respect. And I didn't want it under my name for a variety of reasons. But one of them was I just knew enough people that were going to look at it from an outsider perspective and judge this thing that I felt actually really protective and connected to. And so being able to put up the kind of, shimmery wall of a pseudonym protected that from some of those kind of like, oh, look at that thing energy that I think it's really prone to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a tricky thing. And it's so different for every person and sort of your reasons for making those choices and how you navigate it. I definitely think, as with all things we're talking about, like there's not one single answer that's right. But I do think it is, you have to really think be intentional about and understand your own personal motivations for things. And I think if that's what you're doing, then that's the answer. Right? Wherever your heart lands is the answer. I want to just go back for a second and add a little bit, respond a little bit more deeply to your question in regards to colleagues. I think you said responsibility to who I feel responsible to. I do something I've always done throughout the various parts of my career is try to serve as a resource wherever I can. If there's some information I have that somebody else is just starting to try and figure out for themselves, I'm happy to share it. And I feel like the one place where I do feel at times some responsibility is to, or I don't even know if responsibility is the right word, but I feel like I'm well positioned to help with guiding people to understand what it is we do. And we're doing that with this podcast, right? The ins and outs and behind the scenes of how audiobooks are made, I think has a real impact on the future of our work. And in that way, we're helping our colleagues, right? And ourselves. And that's been a through line through all parts of my career forever and ever, as long as I've been a professional. Anything is if I have a chance to educate people in my sphere in a way that's going to help all of us, because everybody has facts about what's happening here behind the scenes, I'm going to do it. I built an entire theater organization that just does that, right? We support new works, but a huge part of the work we do is educating our community on what it means to make a play and what that really entails, and bringing them into that behind the scenes process in a really active way, because I think that is the key to the future of those pieces and the future of theaters. We're going to bring, people need to understand everything that goes into making this happen. And I feel that way about narration. I feel that way about voiceover, audiobooks, all of it. Any opportunity I have to talk about the ins and outs of what this is, and that it's not just sitting down and reading, I think is helpful to me, and it's helpful to everyone in my circle, everyone else doing this job. And so that in that way, I think I do feel like I have I've taken up the mantle a little bit on, and I also on trying to help with that education piece, but I also enjoy talking about that.
Yeah, right. So it still comes from a real, yeah.
What about you? This is a related but slightly different question. What requirements or obligations, if any, do you feel you need to fulfill in showing up online, but also at in-person events? Do you feel an obligation? And if so, what does that look like for you?
I mean, I'd kind of piggyback off of a little bit what you're saying about education. I really view this entire community as this kind of living, breathing ecosystem. And I am a part of it. And I have a real belief in, separate podcast, Sam Forest Witch, and her feelings on ecology and how we gotta not, shit where we eat. But I think that sensibility I really try to do in terms of how I show up in all of my interactions in person or online. And I think that is again, grounded in the fact that I started, I was doing audiobooks on the side and wasn't really in the community. And then I started producing and directing and engineering before I really even opened the door to be Romancelandia. And so I come with this responsibility of feeling that I want to keep the ecosystem happy and healthy, and that there's a lot of dangers on the path that could seduce people into just bad business practices because of misinformation or because of things that you normalize online or how you interact with people. So I'm very conscious in terms of how I show up in terms of being balanced and understanding that I don't understand where somebody's coming from when they message me about a book, where another colleague's coming from when they do XYZ. There's a lot of producers that are around a certain level, so I'm really conscious of the way, I'm really referral-y. Like anytime I'm arguably like I know I'm a bad businesswoman. Like I kind of hate sales. So like in anytime I talk to a client, I'm like, here's what we offer. Here's how we do. Here's what this is. Also, if that's not your vibe, here are like 10 other producers that I know work in the space that like you should go talk to and do your research and like have all the information. Like you, I'm really grounded in this sense of like have as much information as you can for you to make the choice that is right for you. So I think I try to show up in that way. And I think the only other requirement I have of myself or that I hold myself to is I think anybody's time is a valuable resource. And I think I digested this lesson as like a theater maker when you're trying to get people to come like commute to my show and sit in a theater and watch it. Like that's really valuable. And I respect your time as a result. And so when people choose to spend hours to listen to the books and or then create a beautiful edit and then also reflect on that book and write a review and like post it online, I feel if I'm tagged in that, I do feel that I want to show up and respect the time that was put into that as much as I have a reasonable capacity to do so. So for me, that's just showing up presently. If somebody has waited in line at a convention, for example, I'm always going to try to make the time to like have a real dialogue about certain things and really connect. And if I don't do things like publicly, I will like save certain posts so that I can go back and maybe DM somebody and say, that was a really thoughtful review. Thank you so much for that. And, you know, I'm learning that at scale that becomes difficult. Like I think to some conventions where I've been sandwiched between some of the boys that have like long ass lines and I watch them like be like, I mean, you can't, the way that I get into your family tree and like, you know, the detail that I'll go in it is not sustainable at scale. But I do try to hold on to that like core sensibility of like real connection as much as possible and like mutual respect. As much as I can. I don't know.
Yeah, it's care. It sounds like what you're describing is care, right? Like you care about the work you're doing. You care that people care about it, and you want to help them feel seen and cared for in the moments that you're getting to interact with them for as long as that's sustainable for you. As you named, like it sounds like maybe this wouldn't happen just because the way that you are my first question I asked you, you know, that you're being really careful and thoughtful about the scale of things. But perhaps one day it would, that you have those super long lines too. And then as much as you care, there's at a certain point, it's just not sustainable or possible to show up in exactly that way. And I imagine it would have to shift to size somehow.
To an extent, but then I think of our conversation with Kennedy Ryan and I watch how she, you know, moves about the world and she really is grounded in prioritizing that because she writes stories that come from a personal place and that she knows that when people come back and say, woof, this touched me in a way, like that connection is like so much for me, the foundational like magic of being an artist. And so kind of going back to that sensibility of the stage door that you talked about, as much as I can create space for that kind of experience, I'm definitely going to. And I do feel like sometimes within those interactions, I find myself having to like set a boundary, right? Because like sometimes you open up a fire hose that you didn't know you were opening up by like presently actively listening to someone. And I do have to, for respect of other people that I want to engage with, but also like my own empathetic resources, have to start like easing out of that conversation and like reminding somebody that like, again, like we don't fully know each other. That's maybe not my business to know about you. And like navigating that takes certainly a lot of like care. I mean, have you had like any situations either with readers or just in like your own career and in the way that you show up in this community where you felt that you needed to change course in terms of what you were doing? I mean, you talked a little bit about it earlier that you first showed up and you thought you needed to be this type of person. But are there other examples where you had to either set boundaries or change course?
I think the best examples of that I can think of, or there have been times where it gets to a point where it feels like a little more than I am able to give in return, and also not the way that I view the relationship I've cultivated with them. And so I'll just sort of quietly, you know, I think it's hard. I haven't found it, that hasn't happened to me frequently, but it might be that kind of slowed down because I did shift the way I was engaging. That could be part of it. And I don't know that I could really describe what it is that I did. You know what I mean? But I know there was a shift in me. And so I think it was sort of a little like you're describing of people being stacked in line and you have to kind of like quietly or easily shift out of that conversation is kind of what I've done in these online spaces in some moments where it's felt necessary of maybe my responses are just less involved, you know, or less frequent or at a slower pace to kind of signal, I'm not going to ghost you. I'm not going to like not respond because you are clearly wanting to engage with me. But just to kind of signal like, okay, we're going to back this off just a little bit because it's moved into a space that doesn't feel right to me. And it's not, but trying to not make the person on the other side of that feel like, not unwanted, that's not the right word, but like I don't think they're doing anything wrong.
Right,
you know what I mean? I can see how the interactions we've had thus far would maybe make them think, oh, well, then we can also do this thing and we can talk about this thing, whatever. I can totally get it. I don't think anything badly about them or anything like that, but I just know for me it's not the kind of interaction that I am looking to have with people that I don't know. Actually. So yeah, but it's tricky. I think I don't have a really good, clear answer on how I've done that. I just know that I have. And
you know, it sounds like you know what it feels like for yourself when it comes up, and it's something that you pretty actively respond to so that it doesn't like you're saying, oh, in this interaction, I realized that I kind of opened the door for that to feel like it was right. Now that we're here, that actually doesn't feel right. So now I'm going to like adjust this respectfully because now I've realized that like I've met a boundary for myself. And so it feels like it's this ever-shifting responsive thing.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we talked about this in the last episode. It wouldn't really be appropriate for me to be like, here's the list of things that I'm okay with and the list of things that I'm not okay with. Like that would be a real choice, you know, to do
Rosie's rules.
And oh my God, maybe I do want to do it because that's a really good title. But you know, like that would be strange and unexpected, I think, in that kind of interaction. So what do you do, right? Like what do you say? Do you call it out and say, listen, I'm uncomfortable, please leave me alone? Do you say, like, what do you do? And that doesn't feel right to me either, because I think that also implies that I think this person is doing something wrong, and I don't think they've done something wrong, you know, because I didn't give them a list. I didn't say, I'm here for this and I'm not here for this and so on. So how do they know? And I think it's a little like, I think this is actually what's really particularly hard about social media. When you are in person with someone, if you are, and not everybody is capable of this, or has this skill, but I think a lot of people have the ability to read body language, and tone of voice and social cues that would tell you, oh, this person isn't interested in being in this conversation anymore, so we're going to end it, you know, or something. Someone described it to me once as a window, like the window of conversation, that window is open and you kind of watch for the social cues of when the window closes and you've overstayed your welcome. And that is nearly impossible to do in an online space, to be able to read each other's energy and interest in engaging. And I think that is part of why we got into a place where it's hard to see each other's humanity. It's hard to have deep conversation. It's hard to understand boundaries because we can't see the visual cues. We can't see whether the window has closed or not. And so I'm really aware of that. So if someone has said something or they're doing something or the conversation is moving in a direction that doesn't feel right to me, it's not their fault. They can't see that my window is starting to close, right? So I feel really sensitive to that and want to make sure that I'm keeping that in mind in those interactions. If I do feel like I need to back off, doing it in a really gentle, kind way that honors what we've established here, but recognizes that, okay, my window's closing a little bit, and so I'm going to try to figure out what to do about that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think in an in-person space, at a convention or something, we do get that opportunity to kind of give visual cues to one another. And so I haven't, I can only think of maybe one or two times where that wasn't, but because again, not everybody has that skill set
of course, yeah.
Of, understanding that or being able to pick up on those social cues. So there's been maybe one or two times where I've had to be a little more name it in a more specific way of like, okay, I got to go do this other thing now, whatever. But for the most part, it's really clear when our conversation is starting to come to a natural end or there's some that we're not ready for XYZ type of interaction. But yeah, online definitely feels different to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky. Like I've had some really lovely, honest conversations of people who misinterpreted like a lack of response or responsivity of being like, oh, did I cross a line? And then like somebody would share something and then they'd message me like, oh, I'm so sorry, da-da-da. And I'd be like, no, to be explicitly clear, I don't, contrary to popular belief, I don't live on this app. And so I was just like busy with other things. And I was like, it's always so great to like hear, like I took the opportunity to set for myself because that person responded and said, oh, I think I overstepped. And we were able to have a dialogue about it.
I've heard you say that you, the way you choose to show up in this space is sort of you, but professional you, that everyone in the space is viewed as a colleague. And it seems like that's sort of a guiding principle in how you navigate the space. And I think that speaks to sort of what you were describing earlier in this conversation of how you've managed, when you've had more eyeballs on you, that you're thinking about how you want those interactions to play out in your professional life, but you are always you as a human when you show up in your professional life. So they're kind of intertwined in that way. Can you say a little more about what that means for you, both with people who, are expected colleagues, like other narrators, authors, producers, that sort of thing, but also it seemed like maybe you were applying that to other folks, like listeners, content creators, et cetera. Can you describe that a little bit more, what that looks like?
Yeah. I think as I tried to figure out early on, kind of similar to you of being like, well, I showed up here and Samantha Brentmore is this. I was like, this feels wrong. So then I was like, okay, so then how do I show up? And for me, I was like, oh, well, I'm just going to view Romance Landia as a corporation of thousands and that there's just, we're all... maybe we didn't all go to the same HR training. Maybe there's like different divisions globally, but that we are all colleagues in the same space. And kind of like I said earlier, like we're all part of the same ecosystem. And so for me, that was just like a very familiar thing to me, having worked for organizations of different scales, really small and really large. And so that was like, that was a version of myself that muscularly, I knew how to get into. And then it allowed me to think of people like, there are people that have had at jobs that were the person that I always went out to coffee with, but I didn't know much about them. But man, did we love sharing the same memes and and we loved getting in steps. And that level of casual acquaintance and colleague, helped me then figure out how to interact and what I felt like I wanted in my interactions with fellow narrators, because I've gotten cold called by narrators that I've never worked with, both because I'm a producer but also a fellow narrator, and trying to figure out what I wanted to show up with or felt like I needed to deliver in that interaction and back and forth. And then the same is true of listeners and content creators. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this is a person who's in my department and we might be on a project together. Oh, this is somebody who's just I just see on Slack and we laugh at the same jokes. And it all helped me kind of frame up and guide how I was interacting. And I think actually opened me up to I am really, which is odd as an actor, I'm comfortable with being perceived in a way that is you're over there or up here or in a different way that is not eye to eye. And I understand that is not... that a lot of actors want that distance and a lot of authors want that distance. That is something, but for me, I just don't know. I don't know how to digest or navigate that. And so I have to bring it back down and be we're providing very different things. And where we connect is on this, love of this art form that we do. And so for me, this contextualizing of okay, so then we're all colleagues. We all work together and we all do different things. I could go have lunch with the CEO and be the person who's just like a data entry person, but we still have mutual respect for each other, even if we're bringing different skills and value adds to the corporation of romance. I really hate bringing up corporation as like a kind of like anti-capitalist, like in my core. I hate that I'm using like a corporate metaphor, but like I'm blame the nonfiction I'm narrating right now. But like, so I think that's like that's how it does. And then, it's obviously sometimes like you have the coworker that like there are people that like I left that job years ago, but I went to their wedding and because we just really connected and we had like a personal connection. You and I are people that started out as colleagues that like we just really have this like deep personal connection now. And so, of course a colleague can then become a friend and become more. And, I think just for me, it just helped allow the room for it to go to that further friend zone place and to have really meaningful connections. And also if I needed the boundary to just be like, yep, that's Billy in accounting. And like, we see each other at the water cooler and talk about like cheese sticks, am I right? And so then it allowed me to like, talk to somebody online and be like enemies to lovers. I know. And like it felt authentic, it felt real, and it felt familiar as an interaction.
Does when someone moves into that more friend zone place, like a step beyond colleague or peer, does it change? I mean, obviously it would change sort of your private interactions, but does that change anything about how you show up publicly when engaging with those people?
For narrators, it means that I feel more comfortable to talk in a certain way about them. So like, the like people that I've worked with a lot, I know that they will be comfortable. Like, I'm, chuckle clown over here. I'm always telling jokes. So, like, I will feel more comfortable being like, Eric Nolan can't read. He's not going to be offended by that because I know that we have this base in, like, that joke and that connection. So, like, I think publicly, and I kind of shed light on that connection. Connor Crace is somebody who, like, calls me publicly by, like, a nickname that, like, makes me crack up. And it's just like, okay, because it's like we work a lot together. I think as far as, like, listeners and content creators, I mean, I think it just means that, like, the way, like, sometimes the way that I will, like, comment on something is just more personal in so much as being, like, knowing that I could call somebody a lady and not offend her or something like that, you know what I mean? But, like, I'm not going to be, like, I don't think that I publicly show up because I do understand that as much as for me, I don't think that there's much of a difference. I understand that it could be perceived that I'm, like, trying to lift somebody up in a way that is unintentional. And so I am kind of conscious of some of those interactions. But I don't know. I can't be like so hyper diligent about everything. So I'm sure sometimes things slip. Who knows? On this idea, though, of engaging, right? Like, because we see people engaging online all the time in comments and how they go back and forth, authors, narrators, content creators. When you see then, and you're scrolling through, and you see somebody engaging in a community that feels against your, again, like expectations or unspoken like rules for the community, like how do you navigate that? What's your response to that?
I think that I kind of fail at this, honestly. I would like to be someone who, when I see something's like really not that maybe someone's showing up in a way that doesn't feel true to who I know them to be. Like they've made a choice that I'm like, do you really want to be making this choice that doesn't really track for how I've seen you show up in other ways and the person that I know you to be? I wish I could say that I'm somebody who'd be like, hey, just want to check in with you, that this is really what you wanted to do. But I don't do that unless it's someone I'm like have a particular relationship with. If it's really someone who is strictly like colleague, we haven't had real deep interaction. It doesn't feel like my place, and I don't feel like I know enough about them to know where that thing that I saw is coming from. So I might, if it's something that makes me upset, I might quietly seethe about it, So that's part of it for me. If there's something in like a personal interaction, which is not what you're asking me about, but that didn't feel right, that's a whole different kind of situation. Like you said something not you,
right.
Sam, but whoever. You said something to me that's really didn't feel right to me. I didn't enjoy that interaction. We can talk about that. But that feels different than you've made the choice to do this XYZ thing online. I have been in situations where someone has made a choice and then they talk to me about it. And if I have a feeling about it, I will say and say why, especially if it is something that's like, I see what you did, but it doesn't, in the conversations we've had about XYZ thing, this doesn't feel like it matches with what you've told me. How do you feel about it? Do you feel like it is exactly what you meant it to be or whatever the thing is? But in general, like as a rule of thumb for me in the internet space, I don't feel like the choices that people make online always reflect who they are as human beings. That the online world is weird and it does weird things, and there's data that shows it does weird things to our brains. And so more often than not, when I see someone doing something that doesn't feel right to me, I feel sad. And I know them, I feel sad. Because my first thought is, I feel like they've gotten caught up in this social media world, and this doesn't feel right. Like, this doesn't feel like who I know them to be, and I feel sad. But it's also a choice that they've made, and so who am I to say you shouldn't have made that choice? Like, they must have had a reason for it. But there are situations where if there's something like that that's showing up consistently, where there's someone who is just consistently saying something that doesn't feel right to me, I am going to make a choice about how I interact with that person. Right. Like, if this is a consistent choice they're making, it's not on me to change them, but I can choose where I want them to live in my life, how I interact with them in the future. I can be colleagues and I can be cordial and I can be whatever. But if you've shown me that you're someone who at our cores, we are now very different, our value systems are very different, then I can make the choice to say, I don't need to actively go out of my way to spend time with this person, to interact with this person. And if this is who they want to be, that's what they've chosen, and maybe that's great for them, but it doesn't mean that I have to continue to sign up to be a part of it.
Sure, yeah.
So I think that's the path I most frequently would take in those situations, and it's really hard. And this has happened in many facets of my life outside of work, that there are people who I have loved dearly in particular ways, and we've had specific rapport with one another, and I really like spending time with them, but they've consistently shown up online in a way that doesn't feel right to me, that feels like it lacks nuance, that it's leaving out information for this like internet soundbite, in favor of this like internet soundbite that is not a choice that I would make. And they don't have to make the same choices that I make. I would never hold anybody to the standard of you must do what I do, but I also don't have to continue having our relationship be the same thing that it was previously.
I think the answer is no to this, knowing how you engage online and some of the previous things you've said about like responsibility and where you just like feel your role is and what feels like right for you to say or do. But do you think when you are observing somebody in a community, whether or not it's because they're spreading, they're creating a whole series of misinformation about like, do you know how to say words? Earn $500 a second. Or, they're taking a stance on, anything. Do you feel that you have a responsibility, or we have a responsibility to call in or call out any of that kind of behavior? Or is it kind of more aligned with like, they're going to make their own choices. This is a big enough space for anything, and I'm just going to control how I engage with that person and that messaging?
Yeah, that last bit. That's definitely my approach. And again, I don't know that that's the right answer. Like, I know that calling someone in certain circumstances is really important. But I think what I do is I try to put as much. Goes back to what I was saying before. I try to be the kind of resource that I want to exist in the world. And so my approach is more, I'm going to just continue to double down on the things that I'm doing that feel like they really magnify my values and my just approach to life, to work, to whatever it is. I'm going to keep doing that. And I know it's tiny. Like, these are in really small ways I'm trying to put this stuff out into the world. But I think the way we have the impact we want to have, whatever that means for you, is by one-to-one interactions, right? The more, it's that thing where, like, you smile at someone who is having a bad day and then they feel a little better and they smile at someone that, like, those cheesy commercials that used to show up all the time. I think there's something real to that. And I think that's more how I choose to navigate this stuff, is I'm just gonna stay in my corner and do the things that feel right to me while making active choices. But those things aren't, my choice is never about isolation, right? Like, I'm not someone who's like, I'm just going to care about me and nobody else, and I'm never going to talk to them, and, like, they can ruin their lives, whatever the thing is. That is not at all my approach. I very actively find ways in my life to do what I think is, like, to do what feels good for the world in the ways that I can have an impact, and big and small, online, offline, whatever it is. And so I just doubled down on that. And the way that actually plays out for me in an online space is conversation. Yeah. Like, I see we lack the ability to have real conversation online. And, like, you mentioned the Rosebuds before, that's what that is for me. That's like, here's a place where I can have real conversations with people. And it's not quite there yet, even in what I envision it to be. Like, I want discourse, and I want communication, and I want all of that. I want to find ways to go onto this internet space and get people to talk about stuff. That's what this podcast is. Like, I feel like we are losing more, like, faster and faster, we're losing our ability to talk to one another. Yeah. And so when I see someone blast something on the internet that doesn't feel right to me, it always feels like what's lacking there, in my opinion, is nuance, is like actual conversation. Instead, it's a statement. I'm going to say this thing, you're going to listen to it, and it's going to be big and it's going to be splashy, but you're not necessarily, what that often feels like to me is you're not inviting conversation. You just want people to hear you. And I just prefer conversation. Yeah. And so I'm going to see that, and I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to just go and have conversation.
Well, it feels like grounded. Yeah. I mean, it feels like grounded in a lot of things that you're saying as a through line, which is that, like, you know, if you see things that you want to respond to, you recognize your sphere of influence is more in a high-touch, personal, smaller kind of sensibility, and that it's not that you're not going to try to impact or influence change, but it's just being aware of, like, well, who's actually going to, like, listen and have a meaningful discussion. And a lot of the things I was reflecting on of saying, like, you lose certain things inevitably when you get to scale. So if you're trying to communicate with the sole purpose of getting to scale, you're going to lose some of those things that you've defined for yourself are critically important, which is nuance and listening and staying present.
Yeah. And it's also super self-serving in that way, because I can't exist without that conversation. I can't be in this space and feel good about it if there's a lack of that. And so it's something I want and need, and it's something I want for the world and the people around me. So
but that's what we have to do, right? Like, that's for me in this idea of the ecosystem. Like, I'm going to plant the trees that I want to, like, sit under the shade of in the future. And so, like, be the change you want to see. Like, if I'm not walking the walk and doing these things to try to adjust it, we can only start with our own little spheres of influence. I would agree with that.
Yeah. So let's go down that road a little bit more for you. We're kind of talking about autonomy and individual perspective here, and which can be tricky in an online space. Like, something that often feels like autonomy is really just joining what you think is the crowd in some ways. You know, some of these, like, big, bold statements online feel like I'm speaking my mind, but sometimes it's, oh, these 10 people spoke their mind, and now I feel compelled to do the same. How do you navigate that? And especially when perhaps the choices that other folks are making don't necessarily align with how you would like to be showing up.
I mean, I think that I first always go, I think I start personal and offline. Like, if there's, like, before I would ever have a public interaction about something, I have tried to have it personally. And I think there's like, you know, a sensibility of like, does somebody make it safe for you to have those conversations personally? And if not, you know, whatever. I think there's also, similar to you, like, whose business is my personal opinion on this? And what does my personal opinion like add or take away from something? I talked about this before with Malin, I think, because I have had to navigate this on like a political sphere as an artist for time, particularly like as somebody of like Middle Eastern descent and has watched like people talk about like your people and be like, well, I don't know that like I'm the voice that's going to like change this. And also, who needs to know what my, like, where do my political stances line in this, and who is, you know, who am I talking to? And really like, I'm going to have a dinner party with the people who know me, and we can really debate the nuances of these things. Like, I don't think that a lot of these issues actually can be boiled down to a soundbite. I also recognize that there is value and important need for cultural change to communicate on a mass media scale. I just don't think that I have that skill. And I certainly don't have the team of support to run that messaging through. I think, again, I come from a very risk-averse previous life where I was working with the ad council, where it's like that stuff was going through so many rounds of like review and impact and everything else like that. And I know we don't like live in that world right now, and that's ridiculous. But like, I think, especially for the work that we do, but I just think that it's, for me personally, it doesn't allow me that kind of like long leash lead that I was talking about earlier that allows for a degree of flexibility in terms of changing my mind or position or anything like that. And I think sometimes being really, I think anything you put online, you have to be okay with having it not be yours anymore, because somebody's going to take it, even if it's like a 30-second reel of a sound clip I did in a book. Somebody's going to take 10 seconds of that out of context and then like remix it and play it at 2 times speed. That's like no longer mine to control. And so then you apply that kind of thinking to a political stance or anything else. And I have to be okay with that being taken out of context. And I think because I'm so focused on an intimate one-to-one connection, that's like really hard for me to be compelled to want to be a platform for any kind of messaging, because I think there's just like, there's context to my opinion that you're not going to understand. Yeah. But there is an instinct that I have to fight a lot of times when I do see somebody that seems to be like setting up tent in the proverbial campsite of Romancelandia and not picking up their trash. I do feel compelled to kind of, as close as I can get to that person, get a sense of like what's going on here. And I'm really wary of somebody messaging me and being like, well, you got to watch out for, you know, this or that. I want to form an opinion for myself. And so I'm really inclined to say like, okay, well, thanks for that information. But I'm going to go interact and form opinions and experiences for myself, and then adjust my behavior from there. And then also like not necessarily have to report back to the world what my opinion was. If you're somebody that is a colleague in this space and working with me, I think that you would know me well enough to, and I have had a lot of these conversations in the past about a variety of things, like, what's the standard for duet? Have you worked with this person before? Are they like this? Like, we have these conversations offline and intimately where we can actually dig into all of the aspects of it in a way that's not like just blasting for a soundbite. That's really hard for me. It's really hard for me. And I think like in this day and age, like, where everybody is just like logos on T-shirts now, like it's just a difficult place for me to live and engage with.
Yeah, and something I have appreciated about you is exactly what you just described, of like you are going to go slow enough to make your own determinations about how you feel about a person rather than just listening to the buzz about this person, this company, this whatever it is. And I think that is really hard to, just as you described, where everything is sort of, you must wear your feelings on your shirt. You know, you must like wear a sign that says, this is what I think and feel. It's especially hard be the person that's doing that, to say, no, okay, there's a lot of discourse about this thing, but I can't really know the truth of it or how it sits with me until I go out and discover it for myself. And I think that's really, it's hard to do, and it's really admirable that you take the time to do that. And it's something that, it's something I admire about you, and that I feel like is mostly how I move through the world. But I think I've learned a lot from you and watching you do that about how to go even deeper into that. And I do think the internet space makes it increasingly hard to be that person. I think, that phrase that people like to throw around about when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time, or whatever it is. That's like really frequently cited as like this is how I feel about what XYZ thing. And I think that is wrong.
Yeah.
Honestly. Like, who knows what was going on with that person the first time you met them, and who knows what context they were bringing to a particular conversation. If it happens, this is what I was saying before, like if it's something that becomes consistent over and over again, then you can make some choices about where that person lives in your life, or that thing or that experience lives in your life, or what, if you want to keep it there or not. But I actually think that if you just do I'm just going to believe you the first time, you're missing out on a lot of information a lot of the time.
Yes, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Are there some things, and maybe you don't want to talk about it in the context of a podcast, but do you think that there are some things that we as a community engage in that feel potentially like volatile and dangerous? Or are you like, yes, and I'm not going to talk about them, I'm just going to not engage with them, which is totally a safe answer?
Mm-hmm. Do you mean we, like, specifically in the romance world? Yeah, I think it's what I just said, that like the speed at which things unfold, right? And I don't know if that's like a specific place, a specific event, a specific whatever. It's just everything moves at lightning pace, and there's no time for discussion and there's no time for discourse. And oftentimes we're getting these sound bites, and it's leaving a lot of information out. And I think when you go at that pace, you forget about the humans. You forget that everybody is a human, and they're bringing their own human experience and their own nuanced experience and their own set of context to whatever the situation is. And I think that it can become really hard to undo that. If you've gone so fast and so far and so deep into a particular opinion that you've now shared widely, you can't, at a certain point, you can't undo it, or the work it would take to undo it is massive. And few people, I think, are going to choose to do that work. And I think in this microcosm, this romance community, because so much of the community space is online, and this is where people have ended up making deep connections. And as we've talked about so much, the thing that's being consumed, that's being made, is intimate and special and brings up feelings. This is a feelings genre, right? It's all about feelings. And so we're often in these feelings spaces, and feelings are wonderful and important to acknowledge, but they are not fact, right? And so when we move quickly in our feelings, we forget about fact. We forget about truth. We forget about nuance and human beings and all of that. And we just speed through it all. And I think that never leads to a good result, right? So I think, I don't know if that really answers this question or not, but I do think it's at any time where something feels volatile, I think that's what's at the core. In this space, I think that's what's at the core of it. We've just moved too fast.
I think too fast, for me personally, I would also add, I think when we chase, because of this idea that it is so intimate and personal, I think when we go too hard at scale, shock that I'm going to say this, but I think like we can lose sight of ourselves and like our real genuine connections. So I think like, in my conversations with male narrators in this space who get it, outsized attention and are having to regularly work on, projects at scale. The men I've talked to about how they navigate that, like there's differing opinions on all of it and how they do it. And like some of them are pretty clear of saying like, oh, you just have to like really have a clear like distance path from a lot of that, because if you can lose yourself in that scale because you're responding to so many people and you're responding to how somebody's reflecting you back at you. And I think that goes to like the speed and the voraciousness. Like I think about the way that the speed with which people are consuming these books and like, you know, reading so much, which is like so exciting, but at the same time, like, you know, how much can we really digest and process? And I think the same is true for like how much we can digest and process about us and our impact on other people that we have to be really mindful about. And I think that on the path to trying to book work and be a voice or be, you know, hit our targets professionally, it's easy. You can do that with such like speed and hunger that you forget like the people along the way, the impact you have on them, the impact they're having on you. And I think we gotta just consider that more carefully and recognize that like we're not, I mean, we are our jobs, but also like we're not. Like we could all like just, anyways, I just think that it's like easy to be like too wrapped up and defined by our jobs.
I also think, I guess I will add that one thing that I've noticed observationally that feels hard and can lead to some of the stuff we're talking about now. And I still think at the core of it, it's speed. But I think that also these sort of private or semi-private, sometimes public then private spaces on the internet can make things get really confused, right? That if you are like, we are an exclusive community in this way, and we're starting out because we all have this shared interest, but then that can breed opportunity for semi-private or private interaction with people that you think you know, but you don't know, you know, that what we were talking about in our last episode about trust, and can you really trust people that you've only met, you know, behind a screen or not? And so if you are entering a private space with them for any kind of extended period of time, it's hard to know what you're actually entering into. And again, I the reason I think that's connected to pace and speed is that can happen very quickly, right? Like we build this deep connection because we are like in love with this book or this voice or this whatever it is. And so we connect very deeply about that. And so then we jump to, well, now we're privately, we are friends, but we've skipped a bunch of steps, right? And so that trust isn't fully there necessarily. And so that can lead to, that's not public facing, right? Like those conversations aren't something that like I would get to observe of other people, but I know that that's happening. And we see the results. Sometimes the results of that become public, and that, you know, and then it's sort of this ongoing cycle of we can't slow down fast enough to really unpack how this happened and why. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to take away from the value of, I mean, I think that we've been pretty balanced in making this clear, but like we need to have community and safe space where we connect on these things. But I think we need to 100%. Do it in a measured way to say, just because I connect with you on this, like the example that we said last time of like, we're connecting on parental loss. You still don't know all the nuances of my relationship with my father and what that was, but there are parts of it that we connect on. But let's not presume we know so much about, you know, elsewise. And I think that's just like just tread carefully. That's all. Like just, you know, thoughtfully. Yeah. Yeah. So with all of this, thinking about all of this more heavy stuff, a couple questions for you. Have you ever woken up and been like, I'm ending it all, I'm leaving? No, but that was a really dramatic way to say that. I'm sorry. That was not what I meant to say.
Social media, you mean like engagement. Yeah.
Social media, yes. I'm ending my engagement. I'm leaving the social media space.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that thought, if you don't mind sharing? And if so, what fears, if any, came up for you that kept you? Do you have any fears about that in terms of your career?
Good question. I mean, I think that, so I think that if I did like leave all engagement, that I would still lurk because there is a part of me as an actor and an artist that really wants to understand the context of the work I'm doing. So like pre-online and post-online for my romance work was really foundational because I all of a sudden understood why people were doing hockey stories or like where, these motorcycle stories were coming from or what the conversation around certain content or authors were. I was just much more informed as an artist in the space. So I think even if I didn't show up and engage, I would still lurk because I'm really curious about the community that I'm putting my work into and participating in. And in all the other genres that I work in or the other VO spaces, I am a lurker. Like I don't have, personal VO pages and stuff like that for the exact same reason. Like I want to know what are the cartoons they're doing in New York and what is that experience like? It's all just information that's valuable. I think I have had thoughts about it and like it's too much or that I'm just like, this is not... I have had multiple times where I've had to like check myself and be like, that screen time number makes me sick. And and I don't love what has become just the most prevalent thought for me, which is like, again, not tied to numbers or like scale, just tied to like, again, oh, that book came out. Oh, that author's writing that. Oh, okay. Like it's now normalized to be like, I'm not caught up in this discussion that's totally irrelevant to me about like word count that an author hit. And like, that's not the like noise. I would talk with my artist friends a lot when we were like making divisive theater or devised theater that we would say like, oh, I want like grist for the mill. Like I want to just consume stuff that sits in the back of the brain and is like running and softly informing things. And there are times when I realize that all that's informing my creative brain and my process is just like stuff that I've scrolled online and memes and garbage. And that's when I'm like, stop, go away, which is hard, especially since I have like left New York and I live in a more rural area and there's like not as much to like distract me. So yeah, I think about it a lot. And usually for me, I just like, I put on my blocker on my phone that's like basically pops up and is like, hey bitch, what are you doing opening me again? Like, stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Similar.
Yeah, you got to have
go ahead.
those checks in place for yourself.
Yeah.
I was just going to say it feels really vital to check in with yourself in that way and like what your usage of this is and how much time you're spending.
Yeah, it's important for me to like know that because I just know that about myself. And so it's similarly to how I knew it would be toxic for me to be too focused on like algorithm numbers. Like I know that like usage beyond a certain point is just bad for me. And so like I just know that I gotta put that in. I mean, kind of similar to your question and like, do you like how much has showing online, kind of going back to one of the first questions, how much is showing online do you and showing up in the community gotten you work? And if you left, would you be afraid that it would have an impact on that at all?
Yeah, it's a really good thing to think about. I mean, I can't know, obviously, for certain that this is true. But I will say, I've described several times now that I wasn't engaging. I didn't know that engagement was a thing. And that was at a time where narration was actively a part of my career, but I would say like theater was at the forefront. That's what I was focused on. And like my publishing connections and producer connections would just send me stuff whenever they had something for me. And that was great. And that was what I wanted at that time. And then things shifted for a number of different reasons. And I was like, I really think I would like narration to be more a part of my day-to-day life. And started thinking about what do I want to do about that? And that around that same time is when I learned about the romance community and the online space and started to try and navigate engaging and that really more work started coming in. And I don't really know what was happening on the other end of that and why that was the case, but I just know that the more I got to know the community, and part of it was I understood better what the material was, like what romance as a genre is by joining Oral Fixation and reading, everybody's thoughts about all the books and how they were finding this author and that author. And I started to go down these rabbit holes of getting to know who the players were, who are the other narrators, who are the, aside from the folks that I had done dual narrations with, like, who are the authors that people are paying attention to. And, there's these conventions that people go to and narrators go to them too. I mean, that was actually before having narrators was like a normal thing to do, but I knew that some narrators were popping into conventions, and I thought, that's so interesting. And so I started to learn, and the more I learned, the more work came. So that was really fascinating to me. And I think at this point, I'm not sure that there's still that same correlation. I think, like, it seems like, and again, there's no way for me to, like, do a scientific study on this. I have no idea if this is true. I suspect that if I went sort of back to what I was doing before, but spent more time continuing to connect with other narrators offline, off the social media space, and my producers and publishers, and kept regular communication with them, but disengaged from, like, the social media space, I suspect that my level of work would stay the same. I think I get some growth still from that engagement, but not at the percentage rise that I got when I first entered. And I'm already, like, I'm getting what I want in terms of the work that I want to come in. So I don't think I have a fear that I would lose work. And that could be off base. But I know that I would lose I like having the touch point of continuing to understand what the trends are in the romance space, knowing what books people are talking about, which authors are, like, the focus of people's attention right now, how the audiobook space is shifting because styles are constantly evolving and changing, and what people duet obviously is really on the rise now, and not just duet, but these multicast productions. That's really new, and I wouldn't have any sense of that if I wasn't in these spaces, and I would definitely feel the loss of that. I also really value the connections that I've made certainly with other folks who work in this space, but I value the connections I've made with the listeners. They mean a lot to me. And I like to know what the people that I know are into.
Agreed.
It's not just about the big picture of what's trending, but I enjoy knowing. I enjoy reading reviews from folks that I've met on one or multiple occasions. I enjoy all of that stuff, and it fills me in some way and is helpful to my understanding of what's going on in this space. So I would feel the loss of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would miss that so much, because it is so both between, and the other one too is, like, on that idea of accessibility, I would be so sad to lose the ability to connect with the authors of the work that we're doing. Like, I've had some of the most lovely conversations with authors that's like, well, I just spent all this time on your book or this series or something like that. And it's really nice to be able to make that connection in the same way that it's really nice to make that connection with listeners and go, oh, I know what kind of stuff you like listening to. So it's really curious for me to hear your review on this book that seems in line. Or, wow, you really love only Sweetie Small Town stuff and you just listened to this really dark one. I'm curious what spoke to you about that. Like, I love those conversations.
Yeah, that stands out to me so often. I'm always excited to be surprised by, like, oh, I would not have expected that person to be into that book. That is so interesting to me. What was it about that one that really stood out to them, that drew them to it or whatever? I'm into that also. So I want to switch gears a little bit to think back on these 5. This is now our 5th episode in this deep dive, and the 4 previous episodes, and all of the historical research. Because just to name for the listeners, that Samantha really did so much work to gather all that historical information that we hopefully didn't bore you with for 3 episodes.
When we read Wikipedia entries, sorry.
Right. It was a lot. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work, and I certainly learned a lot from it, and I imagine you did as well. But I'm curious about doing that research and in the conversations we've gotten to have in this community. Has anything changed your perspective, or does it have the potential to reshape your relationship to how you're showing up online?
I am always grateful for an opportunity to be reminded, like, how small I am in a grand scheme of things. And I know that might sound odd, but for me, it adds such beautiful, calming perspective. Is why I love New York City and living there and being there, because you're oh, right, I'm just part of this big organism that we're all a part of.
Totally.
So I think doing this research and putting this moment, this pivot point in time in a grander context, both to other acting communities, but also just in time, was a real great reminder to me of however much I think, oh man, what Susie Q. Jones is doing on the internet right now is the moment. You're well, no, we've been doing this forever. And there's a lot of reasons why we got to this moment here. And it just reminds me to double down on some of my instincts to take a breath before you do anything, that there's always value in being thoughtful, and that these big waves are going to happen, and that we can surf them, ride them, swim under them, whatever. But that my instinct to not want to get caught up in some of that stuff, can serve me. At the same time, there are people who are at the forefront of those waves and ride them and do very well, and it skyrockets them into a success. And I have I really admire that, because I think it takes a different muscular skill set than I have within me. And so I really look to them and see what they're doing is kind of pioneers, for lack of a better term, in it. But I think I'm much more comfortable kind of sitting in the bleachers, watching movements at scale in a different way, and then kind of deciding how to engage in what works best, I think, for me. So I think for me, it just doubles down on that. Were there any aha moments for you in this conversation?
Ooh, yeah, I mean, I definitely was surprised, not necessarily in a good or bad way, in a neutral way. I was surprised by some of the responses to questions that we asked. It was just unexpected. I don't know that it has reshapen anything for me, but certainly I am of the mind that the more information you have about anything, the more informed you are about anything, the better equipped you are to make your own choices. And so I feel grateful to have had this time to get to engage with so many people about this thing that is constantly on my mind. Social media and our use of it as not just in the romance space, but as in the global sense, is constantly on my mind. And it felt really soothing, I think, to regardless if someone was responding in a way that aligned with my views on it, just to be talking about it with people feels really soothing to me, because I have felt so lost in this soup of we're just doing this thing. Again, it's that speed thing. We're just doing this thing. The train has left the station. We can't get it back, you know? And so to be able to slow down and get to hear from people and get to engage in real-time conversations, and also just have people respond really thoughtfully to questions we ask them in writing, has been really soothing to me, and has helped me just kind of feel just to take a breath of, okay, maybe everybody's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't need to be constantly concerned about this. And to your point, the historical piece is also pretty soothing. I think I feel similarly in that way, to kind of zoom out and be oh, there's so much about where we are now that it looks different because of our technology, but the way it's being used, the way there's so much about it that's also similar to what we've seen for generations.
We've been here before.
I think that feels helpful to know.
Yeah, well, it's just easy. For me, it's just easier to not get caught up in certain things, to remind that. Okay, so looking forward, we're going to fast forward. This time next year, what conversations about community do we want to be having next year? And is there one thing that you want to have stated? I don't know. Are there just messages that we want to put out there that this time next year we wish that we were having a conversation around different from the ones we're currently having?
Yeah, I think maybe with the caveat of this is my hope for the future and not like, I think everyone, I would love it if everyone did this, but like it's not my place to make choices for people in that way. I would certainly, I would love to see more introspective, like more time and taking a second to process before responding in general.
Yeah.
Like I think I would love to see that as a rule of thumb in social spaces. Also to not take it with a grain of salt. What's the word? What's the phrase I'm looking for? To give everyone the benefit of the doubt a little bit more than I think we do or that we have allowed ourselves to do in social media spaces. That's something that I would love to see more of. And in terms of the conversations I'd love to be having, I guess I'd love to be talking about if that happens, what does it look like? What does this space look like now? What does community mean to us and look like to us when we've taken the time to do those things? Does it look different? Does it have an impact? My guess is that it would, but who knows? Because I haven't seen it yet. Right. So I would love to see. I would love to experiment with that.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I agree. Like I feel like this. My hope for the future is that we evolve into a place where it's actually way more normalized to be like taking the time to like thoughtfully engage in discourse around the work itself and less about like the popularity contests or kind of the boiling down. This goes back to the speed thing, boiling down like books that we spend like so much time and effort and pieces of like our hearts on. When it gets boiled down to like, you know, the most like little salacious sentence or this because of the popularity, because we're trying to help elevate that author so that more people click it, so that more people buy it, so that that author is doing well. Like I understand the reasoning behind it all. And I think it's much of it is very well intentioned and a lot of it is really fun. And that not everything we work on is, you know, needs like a steak knife and a fork to like dig into. But I just wish in general we were having more conversations thoughtfully just about the work and the stories and why we're telling these stories and what they are. And even if they're just fun party books, why do we need a fun party book right now and what's fun and about that rather than some of the other things that I think are populated. Like I would love to pick up the phone and not have the first thing out of many of my narrator colleagues' mouths being like, oh, I feel like I'm not getting work because I'm not posting and do I need to do something for June is audiobook month? Like I don't want this like fear in this conversation to necessarily be part of it. I wish that there was a little bit more like just grounded, secure in our own well-beings and like just focusing on like telling great stories. It would be great. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm adding that to my list. I'm stealing that, especially the part about just talking about the work itself more and the stories themselves and the things that we narrators love about them, that the listeners love about everybody, to have more engagement on that. And obviously that is happening in a lot of ways with amongst readers or amongst listeners. But I'm my takeaway from what you said, maybe this isn't what you meant, but for us narrators to be a part of that too more and give more time and thought to our connections to that, and in the way that we share about the books that we've worked on, really putting more of a focus on like what's at the core of this book that I connected to.
I think it's the basis of the again, the health of the ecosystem and the work and for us as actors. Like if I'm in the booth, for me, this is just my experience, and my camera is on and I wonder, okay, what do I look like? Because I'm streaming this because I need to get the views because it's helping amplify this. And now I'm like getting steps and steps further away from like the act of just telling this story. And it is all this noise. And then if I'm like, okay, well, I just got to get through these chapters because like I overbooked myself this week because the rates are so low because of, like all these other things that like there's all this noise in here that like if we could just clear out some of that and be like, I'm confident in what my calendar is, and I can just be here with this text, no matter what it is. If it's me in a Trillina Pucci, I'm locked in a cabin and getting it by like 4 guys, and we're just having a blast, and that's great. Like, I want to be present enough for that, and the comedy of that, and the joy of that, and like the sexiness of that, as much as I want to like this really deep, meaningful, like fiction, book that's happening in another genre. I want to be present and not have that noise enough for both of those experiences.
Yeah, I think it's just more joy.
Yes.
Having more joy in all facets of this, in the work that we're making, in the way people consuming it are talking about it. And we've talked about before, like, something that I've observed is it feels like most people that I've spoken to entered into this space because they were fans of this genre. They were fans of romance. They connected on their love of this shared thing that they had so much joy around. And I feel like we've lost so much joy in this community. And I would love for this time next year to be living more in that joyful space in all parts of the romance world.
Gosh, 100%. I hope that we are all way more joyous, like even more so, exponentially more joyous this time next year.
Absolutely. So through all this discussion and research, I think what feels most present is an understanding that we must define for ourselves how we want to navigate this moment and this new implicit, I'm going to put in quotations, requirement of showing up online, given that we're finding there truly is no one set of ethical codes, at least that's been my takeaway in this deep dive on how to show up online. All that's left is for us to check in with ourselves, I think, and to make those determinations for ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, where do we go? I don't know. Perhaps we cling to our autonomy in this space. Maybe the key is being informed and moving forward in a thoughtful and intentional way rather than getting swept up in the fray. It's not just about following a trend or a herd. There is no herd. I mean, everybody is looking to each other, so I think we've just got to be true to ourselves. And in fact, maybe that staying true to yourself allows people to be that much more touched by your art.
So as we wrap up this 5-part deep dive, we want to give our sincerest thanks to everyone who participated in our survey, our live roundtable at Book Bonanza, and all of the many folks who've engaged in conversation with both of us over the past few months and throughout our careers.
Yes. Thank you all for going on this deep dive journey with us as listeners. If the two of us have learned anything over the course of developing this miniseries, it's that our community has reached an inflection point. And it's now more important than ever that we take some time to personally reflect and to have nuanced conversations in our community about how we're showing up for ourselves and for each other. We really hope that you feel inspired to do the same.
We will be back soon with our regular roundtable format, gathering a larger group of folks together to explore some more themes and topics related to the romance audiobook industry.
So be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube or your podcast platform of choice so you are alerted when all future episodes go live.
As always, thanks for listening.